I never imagined that two parents would confess something so devastating in front of me that it would make me question whether the law I swore to uphold could truly deliver justice. I am Judge Carla Washington, 46 years old, Baltimore, Maryland. I have been in the judicial system for over 15 years and have seen it all. Violent divorces, custody battles fought to exhaustion, families destroyed by betrayals, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I heard that Tuesday in November in my courtroom. What began as a routine custody case turned within seconds into the most difficult decision of my entire career. Before I begin, let me know in the comments where you are watching this video from so I can see how far it reached. It was a normal day. Lukewarm coffee, mountains of files, the heating making that annoying noise that nobody fixed. I enter the courtroom, sit down, and review the case. The Thompson family. Contentious divorce, 2 minor children, Emma, 8 years old, and Lucas, 11. The parents, Rebecca and Michael, had been at legal war for 6 months. Nothing extraordinary on paper. She requested full custody, alleging the father's negligence. He countered saying she manipulated the children. The classic case of parents using their kids as weapons. The lawyers present their opening statements, all predictable. Then I give Rebecca the floor for her testimony. She stands up, walks to the podium, and I notice her shaking. I thought it was normal nervousness. She swears to tell the truth. She sits down. Her lawyer is ready to begin with prepared questions when she raises her hand. Your Honor, I need to say something before this continues. Her voice breaks. I look at the lawyer, and he looks as confused as I am. I give her permission, and then she drops the bomb. Lucas is not Michael's biological son. Absolute silence. Rebecca's lawyer is frozen. Michael goes pale. His lawyer stands up to object, but I raise my hand. I need to. Hear this. Rebecca starts crying but continues. She says that 11 years ago she had an affair. She became pregnant. She never knew for sure who the baby's father was. She decided not to say anything. She let Michael believe Lucas was his. For 11 years, she lived with that lie. And now, in the middle of this divorce, the guilt was consuming her. But wait, because here comes the truly shocking part. Michael suddenly stands up. I think he's going to explode with rage. But instead of yelling, what he says chills me to the bone. I also have something to confess, Your Honor. I lean forward. This stopped being a normal case a long time ago. Michael admits that he knew. He discovered the truth when Lucas was 3 years old. He found old messages on a phone Rebecca thought she had discarded. He secretly did a paternity test, confirmed that Lucas was not his biological child, but he never said anything, never mentioned it. He kept raising Lucas as his own because, in his words, he already loved him as such. The courtroom is in total shock. The lawyers don't know what to do. Honestly, neither do I. But Michael doesn't stop there. He continues confessing that over these years he used that secret. Every time Rebecca and he argued, every time she threatened to leave, he thought of that secret as his ace up his sleeve, his safety net. If she left, he could reveal the truth and destroy her. He knew it was psychological manipulation. He knew it was wrong. But he did it for 8 years. Now I have to process this. 2 devastating confessions. A mother who deceived and lied for 11 years. A father who discovered the truth, hid it, and used it as an emotional weapon for 8. And amid all this, 2 innocent children who have no idea of the nuclear bomb that just exploded in their courtroom. I declare an immediate recess. I need to think. In my office, with the door closed, I stare at the ceiling. What do I do with this? The law is clear in many respects, but here the waters are murky. Michael is not the biological father, but has been the legal and emotional father of Lucas for 11 years. Rebecca committed paternity fraud, which has legal consequences. But how does all this affect custody? What is best for these children? I call my assistant. I ask that social services be contacted immediately. I need psychological evaluations of the entire family. I need to speak to the children separately. I need to understand the damage this could cause if handled poorly. Days later, I have the evaluations. Lucas has an incredibly strong relationship with Michael. For him, Michael is dad, period. He knows no other reality. Emma is more attached to Rebecca, but also loves her father. Both children are confused by the divorce but know nothing of the confessions. The psychologists are clear. Revealing this to Lucas now could be devastating, an 11-year-old questioning his entire identity amid an already traumatic divorce. They recommend waiting, family therapy, gradual preparation. But here is the legal problem. Michael could now legally disassociate himself from Lucas. He is not his biological responsibility. If he wanted, he could fight not to pay child support, to avoid legal obligations, and Rebecca could do nothing because she created this situation with her deceit. I summoned both parties to my private office. No lawyers. Just the two of them and me. I need to understand their true intentions. I ask Michael directly, "Do you want to continue being Lucas's father?" He breaks down crying. He says Lucas is his son, regardless of biology, that he has watched him grow, that he was there on his first day of school, taught him to ride a bike, comforted him in nightmares, that he can't imagine not being his father. But he also admits he is furious with Rebecca, that he feels she stole his option to decide from the beginning. I ask Rebecca why she confessed now. She says she couldn't keep lying. That, every night, guilt ate her alive, that her children deserve to grow up in a family without secrets, without lies that could explode later. She acknowledges what she did was wrong, completely wrong, but she doesn't know how to fix it. Here's my dilemma. The law demands clarity, black or white, but real life is completely gray. I have to issue a ruling that protects the children, but also recognizes the parents' actions. I have to be fair, but also compassionate. I have to think about the now and the future of this broken family. I spend sleepless nights reviewing legal precedents. I consult confidentially with colleagues. I read studies on paternity, child identity, family trauma. This decision will mark this family forever. Finally, the day of the ruling arrives. The courtroom is full. Both extended families are present. The children are with a guardian in another room. I begin my reading. First, I address custody. Based on the evaluations, I grant shared custody. Both parents, despite their monumental mistakes, love their children. Both have been present figures. The children need both. Then I address the delicate matter. I order that Michael maintain all his rights and obligations as Lucas's legal father. He voluntarily accepts this on record. This protects Lucas legally and financially. But I also order mandatory family therapy. A trained professional will help navigate how and when to reveal the truth to Lucas in a manner appropriate to his age and emotional development. For Rebecca, I impose conditions. She must cover all the costs of family therapy. I also establish that, if in the future Lucas wishes to know his biological origin, she must provide all information without obstruction. But here comes the hardest part of my ruling. I look both parents in the eye and speak off the official record. I tell them that what they both did was deeply selfish, that they used secrets and lies as weapons in their marriage, that their children did not deserve this, that they are lucky, very lucky. Their children still don't know the chaos they created. I tell them this ruling gives them a chance to do right from now on, to truly put their children first, not just in words, to build honesty from today, even if the past is full of lies. I bring down the gavel, case closed legally. But I know the real work for this family is just beginning. Months later, I receive a follow-up report. Family therapy is progressing. Michael and Rebecca have established a civil co-parenting relationship. The children are adapting to the new arrangement. Lucas's secret has not yet been revealed. The therapists continue working toward that moment. This case changed me. It showed me that sometimes justice is not just about coldly applying the law. It's about understanding that behind every file, there are real people with real mistakes, with real pain. My job is not to judge morally. My job is to protect the most vulnerable and give broken families the tools to heal. Did I do the right thing? I don't know for sure. Some colleagues said I was too lenient with Rebecca. Others said I didn't consider Michael's trauma enough. But I made the decision thinking of Emma and Lucas. They didn't ask for any of this. They just want to be children with parents who love them. This ruling will stay with me forever. It reminds me why I chose this job and how hard it can be. Justice is never simple when human hearts are involved. I only want the content of the text translated without any explanation or indication. I remember perfectly that Tuesday in October when I was reviewing file number 47823. It was the fifth custody hearing scheduled for that week, and honestly, after 22 years in the judicial system, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. The Martinez family versus the Martinez family. Custody dispute over 3 minors. Standard paperwork, typical accusations. He claimed that she was emotionally unstable. She asserted that he prioritized his work over the children, the usual routine in these cases that tear families apart. When they entered the courtroom that day, something in their body language caught my attention. It wasn't the usual hostility that characterizes these proceedings. There was something else. A different kind of tension, as if both were carrying an invisible weight that made them walk slower, avoiding eye contact not out of hatred, but something I couldn't identify at the moment. They took their places at opposite ends of the room, as is customary, but I noticed they both held their folders with trembling hands. We began with the standard procedure. Mrs. Martinez's lawyer presented the arguments I had already read in the documents. Prolonged absences of the father, lack of involvement in school activities, prioritization of business trips over important events for the children. Everything was going as expected until Mr. Martinez's lawyer asked to speak for a preliminary collatus statement. What happened next changed everything. Mr. Martinez stood up, but did not look at me as litigants usually do. He looked at his wife, and at that moment, I saw something I rarely witness in my courtroom. Genuine tears in the eyes of a man who was clearly about to emotionally collapse. His lawyer tried to continue with the formal presentation, but he raised his hand, asking him to stop. His broken voice broke the silence in the room in a way that even made the court reporter lift her eyes from her machine. Your Honor, I need to confess something that changes this entire process, something my wife discovered 6 months ago, and that has been the real reason for this separation. I paused in my notes. At that moment, I could have stopped his statement. I could have asked that everything go through his legal representative, but something in my instinct told me to let him speak. I nodded for him to continue, and what followed was a revelation I will never forget. He explained through sobs that for the past 8 years, he had been living a double life, but not in the way everyone in that room initially imagined. There was no mistress, no embezzlement of family funds, no hidden addictions. The truth was much more complex and devastating. He had another family, not the result of an affair, but the product of a previous relationship he believed had ended more than a decade ago. A woman from his past had reappeared with 2 children, claiming they were his biological sons. Born shortly after he ended that relationship and began his life with Mrs. Martinez. The room fell into absolute silence. I kept listening as he explained that he had initially doubted this claim, but the paternity tests he himself requested confirmed the inevitable. He was the father of those 2 children, now 7 and 9 years old. Over the past years, he had been sending money, visiting them secretly, creating a parallel life structure that drained not only his financial resources, but also his emotional presence from the family everyone believed was his only reality. But the story didn't end there. When I looked at Mrs. Martinez expecting to see the understandable reaction of shock or anger, what I saw was something completely different. She was crying too, but there was determination in her expression. She stood up without being asked and said firmly, "Your Honor, I also need to make a confession that affects this case." My heart skipped a beat. In more than 2 decades judging family cases, I had never experienced a moment like this. 2 consecutive unplanned confessions, no lawyer's scripts, no apparent legal strategy. Just 2 human beings breaking down before the judicial system. Mrs. Martinez explained that when she discovered the truth about the other children, her world collapsed. The betrayal, the years-long lie, the missing money she had attributed to bad investments all made sense in the most painful way possible. But her confession went beyond expressing her pain. She revealed that in the midst of that crisis, she had also made decisions that deeply affected the well-being of her 3 children. She admitted that she had begun a relationship with someone else just 2 months after discovering the truth. That part didn't surprise me as much. Emotional consolation is understandable in situations of betrayal. But then she added the detail that turned this case into the most complex dilemma of my career. That new person in her life was Daniel, Mr. Martinez's younger brother. And not only that, Daniel had been living in the family home for the past 3 months, living daily with the children who were technically his nephews, while maintaining a romantic relationship with his soon-to-be ex-sister-in-law. Mr. Martinez's lawyer immediately requested a recess. Mrs. Martinez's representative seemed as surprised as I was. Clearly, these confessions had not been part of any pre-established legal strategy. I granted 30 minutes of recess, but knew I would need much more than that to process the implications of what I had just heard. As I withdrew to my office, my mind raced, analyzing the layers of this case that had transformed before my eyes. It was no longer a simple custody dispute. I was now facing a scenario where 5 children were affected, 2 in a situation of late recognized paternity, and 3 living amid a family dynamic that had imploded in ways no legal manual could have anticipated. During the recess, I sat at my desk staring out the window without really seeing anything. The revelations from both parents swirled in my mind like an impossible whirlwind to organize. I had handled cases of infidelity, cases of questioned paternity, cases where family dynamics were complicated by third parties, but never all of them combined in a single situation. And even less so with that element that exponentially complicated everything: the brother. The relationship between Mrs. Martinez and Daniel was not technically illegal. There was no legal impediment for 2 single adults to start a relationship, but the emotional and family complexity this generated was absolutely devastating. I called my assistant and asked for all the reports from the social workers who had visited the home in recent months. I needed to understand how much the children knew, what the professionals had observed, if there were any signs of trauma or behavioral changes in the minors that could guide my decision. While reviewing the documents, I found notes that now took on a new meaning. The social worker had reported that the children frequently mentioned Uncle Daniel and seemed to have a close relationship with him. At that time, those notes had seemed positive, indicating a familial support network. Now, under the new light of the confessions, those same observations became evidence of a much more complex situation. One of the reports mentioned that the eldest son, 11 years old, had said he liked it when Uncle Daniel took them to school because their father was always busy. Another note indicated that the 8-year-old daughter had drawn her family in a therapy session, including Uncle Daniel in the house, but leaving her father out of the drawing. At that time, the professionals had interpreted this as the emotional distance generated by the father's work absences. No one had considered the real reason for those absences, nor the true nature of Daniel's presence in the everyday lives of those children. When we returned to the courtroom after the recess, the tension was palpable. Both lawyers had had intense conversations with their clients. That was evident. Mr. Martinez's representative stood and formally requested that the situation of the other 2 children be considered in the case analysis. He argued that his client had been trying to meet responsibilities for 5 children in total, not 3, and that this was the fundamental reason for his absences and the financial pressure the family faced. He presented bank documents showing significant monthly transfers to the mother of the other 2 children, payments for education, medical expenses, all meticulously documented over years of a hidden life. Mrs. Martinez's lawyer countered, arguing that regardless of the reasons, Mr. Martinez had systematically lied for years, diverted family resources without his wife's consent, and had prioritized a situation stemming from his past irresponsibility over the welfare of his children within the marriage. Furthermore, she noted that her client's relationship with Daniel had begun after the de facto separation, when she already knew the marriage was over, and that Daniel had been a genuine emotional support during the most difficult time of her life. But then something happened that neither lawyer expected. I asked both parents to approach the bench. I decided to do something unconventional, something I rarely do but felt absolutely necessary in this case. I asked them directly, without the filter of legal representatives, what they really wanted for their children. Not what they wanted to win in the legal process, not how they wanted to punish the other, but what they genuinely believed was best for those 3 children who had not asked to be born into this complexity. Mr. Martinez spoke first. In a calmer voice than before, he explained that he had felt trapped in an impossible situation since confirming the paternity of the other 2 children. He knew he had to acknowledge them. He couldn't abandon them, but he also couldn't bear the idea of destroying the family he had built with Mrs. Martinez. So he made the worst possible decision, to try to keep both worlds separate. He admitted he had been cowardly, that he should have had the difficult conversation years before, that he should have trusted his wife and faced the situation together. Now he only wanted his 3 children within the marriage to have stability, even if that meant he played a reduced role in their lives while rebuilding the trust he had destroyed. Mrs. Martinez took a deep breath before speaking. She acknowledged that her relationship with Daniel had started from a place of pain and vengeance. She wanted to hurt her husband as deeply as possible, and what better way than getting involved with his own brother? But she confessed something that was clearly hard for her to admit, that over the weeks, her feelings for Daniel had become genuine. It was not just retaliation, she had truly fallen in love. And that terrified her because she knew how it would look from the outside. She knew the collateral damage this would cause in the extended family relationships. She knew her children would eventually have to process this complexity. At that moment, I made a decision that broke my usual protocol. I ordered psychological evaluations to be conducted not only of the children, which were already scheduled, but also of both parents and Daniel. I needed to understand the mental health of all the adults involved in this situation. Additionally, I requested that the mother of Mr. Priest Hein, Martinez's other 2 children, be brought into the process. If we were going to consider the full picture, she also needed to be part of the conversation. I scheduled a new hearing for 3 weeks later, enough time for the evaluations to be completed and for everyone involved to reflect on the gravity of what was at stake. Before adjourning, I did something I rarely do from the bench. I spoke to them as a human being, not just as a judge. I told them I understood that life situations sometimes overwhelm us, that people make mistakes, and that pain can lead us to make decisions we later regret. But I reminded them that at the center of all this chaos were 3 children who bore no responsibility for the adults' decisions, 3 lives that would be shaped by what happened in that room. When everyone left, I stayed alone in the courtroom looking at the file, which had grown considerably in a single session. I knew the coming weeks would be crucial, that the information I received would determine a decision affecting not only this family, but potentially 5 children whose lives were intertwined in ways no one could have predicted. And for the first time in years, I felt the full weight of the responsibility I carried on my shoulders. The 3 weeks that followed were probably the most intense of my judicial career. The psychological reports began to arrive one by one, and each document added a new layer of complexity to an already seemingly impossible situation to unravel. The forensic psychologist who evaluated Mr. Martinez described a man with avoidant tendencies, someone who had used work and emotional distance as defense mechanisms for years. He was not a violent or malicious man, but he was deeply immature emotionally, someone who preferred to create parallel realities rather than face difficult conversations. The evaluation of Mrs. Martinez revealed signs of significant emotional trauma derived from the discovery of her husband's double life. The psychologist noted symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress, manifested in hypervigilance, difficulty trusting, and an obsessive need to control her immediate environment. But she also identified something I found particularly relevant. The relationship with Daniel seemed to have arisen not only from revenge, but from a desperate need for validation, to feel chosen after years of feeling second in her husband's priorities. The report on Daniel was perhaps the most disturbing. The psychologist suggested that he had been in love with Mrs. Martinez for years, possibly even before she married his brother. He had kept those feelings hidden, respecting the marriage from a distance. But when he saw the opportunity to get closer amid the crisis, he took it without fully considering the family ramifications. The professional pointed out that Daniel showed a disconnect between his actions and the emotional consequences for others, particularly for the children who saw him as an uncle and would now have to recategorize that relationship in their minds. But it was the evaluations of the children that truly kept me awake at night. The child psychologist who worked with them separately reported that the eldest son, Mateo, had begun to exhibit significant anxiety behaviors. He bit his nails until they bled, had recurring nightmares, and his school performance had dropped dramatically. During the sessions, he asked several times if it was his fault that his parents were separating, if there was something he could have done differently. He was carrying the weight of a responsibility that should never have been his. The middle daughter, Isabella, had taken on the role of emotional caregiver for her mother. At 8 years old, she was already monitoring Mrs. Martinez's mood, adjusting her own behavior to avoid adding extra stress. The psychologist described this as parentification, a phenomenon where children assume adult roles prematurely, with long-term consequences for their emotional development. Isabella had stopped talking about her own feelings, focusing exclusively on maintaining peace at home. The youngest, Sebastian, only 5 years old, showed the most worrying signs of regression. He had started wetting the bed again after 2 years of overcoming the problem, constantly sucked his thumb, and had developed an anxious attachment to his mother, crying inconsolably every time she left his sight. The trauma of the separation and the tension at home were manifesting in his body in ways he had no words to express. The hearing where the mother of the other 2 children was to be incorporated was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. When Ana Rodriguez entered the room, the tension was palpable. She was a woman approximately the same age as Mrs. Martinez, with an expression mixing resentment and exhaustion. Her lawyer explained that she had kept the existence of her children a secret at Mr. Martinez's express request for years, hoping that eventually he would publicly assume his paternity. When he finally did, it was not out of courage but because she threatened to file a paternity recognition lawsuit that would make everything public anyway. Ana presented evidence no one in the room expected. She had years of text messages, emails, and recordings of phone conversations where Mr. Martinez repeatedly promised that he would leave his wife, that they would formalize their relationship, that his children would stop being a secret. Empty promises that lasted nearly a decade. She described how her children would ask why their dad couldn't take them to school events, why he didn't appear in family photos, why they had to lie about who he was when he occasionally visited them. Mr. Martinez's lawyer tried to argue that Ana had accepted those conditions voluntarily, that she had been a conscious participant in keeping the situation hidden. But Ana responded with heartbreaking dignity. She explained that when she got pregnant the first time, she was very young, in love, and genuinely believed Mr. Martinez would leave his wife as he promised. By the time her second child was born, she was already trapped in a pattern of emotional and financial dependence, with 2 children to support and a situation that seemed to have no way out without causing an explosion. That was when I decided to do something completely out of protocol. I requested a recess and asked to meet privately with both women, without lawyers present. I needed them to see each other not as adversaries in a legal process, but as 2 human beings deeply hurt by the decisions of the same man. At first, both resisted. Their lawyers protested, arguing that any conversation should be recorded. But I insisted, using the discretion my position allowed me. In my office, sitting face-to-face for the first time without the barrier of legal desks and representatives, something extraordinary happened. Ana began to cry, not with anger but with a deep, ancient pain. Mrs. Martinez, after a moment of visible tension, extended her hand and touched Ana's arm. They said nothing for several minutes, only shared that space of mutual pain. Finally, Ana spoke. She said she had never wanted to destroy a family, that she had convinced herself for years that Mr. Martinez was unhappy in his marriage, that it was only a matter of time before everything resolved naturally. Mrs. Martinez responded with brutal honesty. She admitted that part of her hated Ana, that she saw her as the embodiment of her husband's betrayal. But another part, the part that had spent the last few weeks in intensive therapy, processing her own pain, recognized that both had been manipulated by a man who prioritized his own comfort over honesty and the well-being of everyone involved. It didn't mean she forgave, it didn't mean she forgot, but it did mean she could see the situation more clearly. I asked them directly what they wanted for their children, for the 5 children who now knew of each other's existence. Ana expressed that her children deserved to know their half-siblings, that it wasn't fair for them to pay for their father's mistakes with isolation. Mrs. Martinez, after a long silence, slowly nodded. She said the idea made her stomach churn, that every fiber of her being wanted to protect her children from that complexity, but that she also knew that denying reality wouldn't make it disappear. That conversation in my office was the turning point I needed to make my decision, but the road to the final sentence was still full of obstacles that no one had anticipated. When we returned to the courtroom, Mr. Martinez looked as if he had aged 10 years. His lawyer informed me that his client wished to make an additional B indice aus. Normally, I would have denied this request at this stage of the process, but something in the man's expression made me grant him the floor. What he confessed at that moment left everyone silent. Mr. Martinez admitted that he had attempted suicide 3 nights before. His brother Daniel had found him in his apartment, unconscious from a pill overdose. He had not wanted to mention it before because he felt ashamed, because he thought it would seem manipulative, an attempt to gain pity. But his therapist had told him he needed to be completely honest about his mental state. He described how guilt was devouring him alive, how every night he saw the faces of his 5 children and could not breathe thinking about the harm he had caused them. He was not asking for forgiveness or compassion. He just wanted it to be recorded that he understood the magnitude of what he had done. This revelation completely changed the atmosphere in the courtroom. Mrs. Martinez brought her hands to lead, her mouth visibly shocked despite everything. Anna began to cry silently. Even Daniel, who had kept a stoic expression during most of the hearings, closed his eyes with evident pain. I had to take another recess because I needed to process this information and determine if additional psychiatric evaluations were required before proceeding with sentencing. During that recess, I consulted with the forensic psychologist who had evaluated Mr. Martinez. He confirmed that he had noticed suicidal ideation during his sessions, but that his client had minimized the intensity of those thoughts. He strongly recommended that any custody arrangement include mandatory therapy and ongoing psychiatric supervision. We could not ignore that we had a man in deep crisis whose decisions would directly affect the welfare of 5 minors. When the time finally came to sentence, 2 weeks after that shocking revelation, my courtroom was filled not only with the involved parties, but also with social workers, therapists, and even a specialized family mediator who had begun working with both families. I had decided to address this case not with the traditional rigidity of the law, but with a restorative approach that prioritized healing over punishment. I began by explaining that this case represented one of the most complex challenges I had faced in my career because it involved multiple layers of harm. There were no clearly defined villains in the traditional sense, only deeply imperfect human beings making terrible decisions under complicated circumstances. However, my primary responsibility was to protect the welfare of 5 innocent children who did not ask to be born into this situation. I ordered that the primary custody of the 3 children of the Martinez marriage remain with Mrs. Martinez, but with a structured and supervised visitation schedule for Mr. Martinez. Visits would begin under professional supervision until psychological evaluations showed significant improvements. In the children's emotional stability and the father's ability to handle the situation healthily, I explicitly prohibited Daniel from being present during these initial visits. Although I understood that the relationship between Mrs. Martinez and Daniel was their personal decision, the children needed time to process their parents' separation before dealing with the added complexity of their uncle, now playing a different role in their lives. For the 2 children Mr. Martinez had with Anna, I established a more balanced shared custody arrangement, given that Anna had been the primary caregiver for years, but acknowledging that these children also needed time with their father. However, this arrangement also included initial supervision and mandatory family therapy, but the most controversial part of my sentence was what I ordered next. I mandated that after 6 months of individual therapy for each child, a gradual supervised integration process between the half-siblings would begin. It would start with group therapy sessions specifically designed to help the children process their feelings about this new family reality. Eventually, if the therapists deemed it appropriate, casual meetings would be organized in neutral environments like parks or museums, always with professionals present. Mrs. Martinez and Anna exchanged looks when I announced this. It was not what either of them truly wanted, but both nodded with a resignation that seemed to mix pain and acceptance. I explained my reasoning as clearly as possible. These 5 children shared DNA and a father. Whether I liked it or not, that was an immutable fact. We could force them to live as strangers, allowing resentment and shame to define their relationships, or we could give them the tools to build some kind of healthy connection on their own terms. It was not guaranteed to work, but completely denying them that possibility seemed to me another form of punishment they did not deserve. I also ordered Mr. Martinez to pay not only the legally required child support, but to fully finance therapy for all involved, adults and children, for as long as necessary. If he truly wanted to repair even a fraction of the damage caused, this would be his minimum responsibility. Finally, speaking directly to Mr. Martinez, I said something I rarely express from the bench. I told him that his decisions had created extraordinary devastation, that 5 children would now bear the consequences of his cowardice and selfishness. But I also told him that the suicide attempt, although understandable from a certain emotional perspective, was the most selfish way out of all. His children did not need him to kill himself. They needed him to do the incredibly hard work of becoming a better man, a present and honest father, even if it was late. That would be his true punishment and his only possible redemption, to live each day with what he had done and work tirelessly to minimize the damage. When I left the courtroom that day, I felt exhausted in a way that went beyond the physical. I had sentenced cases of violence, fraud, and severe negligence before, but something about this case had affected me differently. Perhaps because the evil here was neither obvious nor monstrous, it was banal and human, the kind of destructive decisions ordinary people make when they prioritize their immediate comfort over long-term consequences. 6 months later, I received a follow-up report from the family mediator. The children were making progress in therapy, although the road was slow and painful. Mateo had stopped biting his nails. Isabella was beginning to talk more about her feelings, and Sebastian no longer wet the bed every night. Anna's children also showed improvements, particularly in their ability to express their confusion and pain healthily. The first meeting between the 5 half-siblings had been awkward, but not disastrous. They had played together for 20 minutes under Tangu's supervision before the situation became too emotionally intense. Mr. Martinez was complying with all court orders. He attended therapy religiously, never missed a scheduled visit, and, according to reports, was genuinely trying to be present for his children in ways he had never managed before. He could not erase the past, but it was something. This case taught me that justice does not always resemble what we see in movies, with clear villains and innocent victims. Sometimes justice is simply trying to contain the damage, creating structures where healing is possible, though not guaranteed, and recognizing that some wounds will never fully heal, but can, with work, become scars that people learn to carry. And that sentence, handed down not with satisfaction but with cautious hope, will be etched in my memory forever as a reminder that being a judge sometimes means holding the pain of others while seeking the least harmful path forward.